Where are you calling in from, David?
New York. So
Nice, awesome.
Where's everybody else at?
I'm in Seattle.
Nice. There's going to be the refi event. I think, was it next week?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the 11th-ish, something like that.
10th and the 11th. Actually,
Nice.
David, Robbie just texted me to see if I was going to be there with Alan and with the team. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, beautiful. I unfortunately won't be able to make it, but I will be optimistically and very anxiously awaiting all any positive details that may come out of it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to hang out for a couple minutes and get started once a few more people have shown up. If you can drop in the chat, if you're in the Zoom room, if you can drop in the chat how much you already know about Filecoin Green, where 1 is not very much and 3 is I know a lot, that would be awesome. I'm trying to gauge how quickly to go through some intro slides. Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so for anyone who just joined, we're going to get started in a couple minutes. If you want to drop into the chat how much you already know about Filecoin Green on a scale from 1 to 3. So 1 is I don't know very much. 2 would be like I know some. 3 would be I know a lot. Let's just get to the non-overview content. That would be awesome. Just 1 to 3. Thanks Alex and Rich. I'm going to say a few new things, but I want to get an idea how much to give people an overview. And feel free to drop in when you're 2.75. I love the precision, Harold. If you want to drop in where you're calling in from, feel free. People see my slides? Good. Nice. Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And if you want to follow along with these slides, or you want to check them out afterwards, or maybe look at some references, I just dropped the URL in the chat. It's tinyurl.com/filecoin-green-slides. Pretty straightforward. These are sort of a set of overview slides on things that we're doing in Filecoin Green that have a lot of additional references and links if you want to click through them. So let's get started. Welcome. I am Alan Ransel from Filecoin Green. This is our May meetup where we talk about what we're doing in Filecoin Green and highlight a few different projects or initiatives in the community. Filecoin Green is Protocol Labs initiative to make Filecoin verifiably sustainable and also to build the world's best tools to measure and reduce environmental impacts into Web3. So our thought is we believe in the power of Web3 and of crypto and of Filecoin specifically to change the world in all sorts of ways. And one of those ways is to pull sustainability data through the economy faster and with a greater degree of precision than you can with existing Web2 tools. And so what Filecoin Green exists to do is to build the ability to do that within the Filecoin ecosystem, but build those tools to a degree of generality that we can use them across crypto and across the broader world. And so by building the greenhouse gas protocol into Web3, we're going to allow rich environmental data to flow through supply chains in minutes, not in months. So there are three problems related to this. So firstly, in crypto, everyone knows now we need to measure, we need to reduce, we need to mitigate environmental impacts. Secondly, in finance, you might be aware if you read financial news, the SEC recently announced that they are planning to require all public companies in the US to register environmental data, so to tell shareholders what their environmental footprint is. So they need better tools in order to more easily, accurately, and comprehensively account for their environmental footprint. And then third, we need, for the benefit of the natural systems that we depend on, we need more sophisticated tools in order to assess the environmental impacts of what we do in the economy. And so there's a few different things that we work on here. So the main initiatives of Filecoin Green are, firstly, we've done a lot of work on evaluating the energy use of the Filecoin network itself. We've done a lot of work on connecting the Filecoin network to renewable energy. We've worked to support storage providers in becoming more sustainable. And the second talk here from Marc, you're going to hear a lot more about our initiative there and our thinking there. And we're building an environmental Web3 development community through all sorts of events and hackathons and grants. And if you want to be involved in that, there's more information on these slides as to how to do that. And so one of the initiatives that we've undertaken is to evaluate the energy use of Filecoin. So Filecoin is a distributed storage network. When you mine on Filecoin as a storage provider, you don't just solve a proof of work algorithm, you mine by storing data and proving that that data is stored over time. So there are these two major components to that. One is what's called sealing. This is when you onboard data to the Filecoin network, and that involves setting up a series of zero knowledge proofs that are going to allow you to prove that you're storing that data over time. And setting those proofs up requires energy. Then the second component of this is storage. So you have to actually store that data over time, and you have to prove that you're continuing to store that data over time, that's not something that a Web2 cloud provider does. They don't prove every day that they continue to have your data. You just sort of hope that they're continuing to store your data. Whereas in Filecoin, the storage provider proves every 24 hours that they continue to have this copy of your data. So when we took a look at this, we tried to understand, based on on-chain proofs on the Filecoin blockchain, what is the energy use of the overall network, but also of every individual storage provider in that network. One of the great properties of the Filecoin blockchain is that because it requires every storage provider to prove how much storage capacity they're contributing to the network over time, we're able to take that very granular data about activity in the network and translate that into an energy use profile. This allows us to look at, over the course of a day or over the course of a block time even, we can see how the energy use of Filecoin storage providers changed at this really granular level. So we're able to map this not just to the network as a whole or some techno-economic model on top of the entire network, which is sort of the type of modeling that you have to do for a lot of different chains. You have to make assumptions about who is mining on the network and not winning block rewards. With Filecoin, because we know exactly how much energy, how much storage capacity every individual node is contributing, what we can do is turn those proofs into an energy use profile. And one of the things that allows us to do is to build tools like the energy use dashboard at filecoin.energy. Again, if you have these slides up, and I'll drop the link to these slides again in the chat. If you have these slides up, you can click a link to there. You can also just dial in filecoin.energy in your browser. You can go and look at this dashboard and look at your favorite Filecoin storage provider, dial in a miner ID, and look at the energy use profile of that storage provider. The other thing this allows us to do is connect or compare the amount of energy required to store data on Filecoin to the amount of energy required to store data with typical Web2 data centers. So about 0.87% of all of the data center storage capacity in the world is on Filecoin, which is incidentally, pretty huge, considering that the network only launched in late 2020. And about 0.67% of all of the energy in data centers is currently used in Filecoin. Now, there's two different components to this, right? So I talked a couple slides ago about the fact that you need to seal data, and then you need to store data in order to store data on Filecoin. Filecoin energy doesn't currently include energy to do workloads on data. So this 0.67%, 0.87%, it's not a direct comparison in the sense that those data centers are doing additional workloads on data. So it actually does require, if you're just storing data on Filecoin versus storing data in a typical data center, it requires currently about 173% of the amount of energy to store data on Filecoin as it does in a typical data center. And that's because of this extra overhead that you're proving that you're storing data over time. However, as the network grows, that improves. So it's actually fallen by about a factor of 2.5 over the past year. Or there's this other stat here, the energy intensity of the network has decreased. So the network has gotten more efficient by about a factor of 5% from November to, I believe, March. And we can, if you're interested in that, please contact me. We can share more information on where these numbers come from and how we're calculating them. It's all based on data in the Filecoin energy use dashboard. Another thing that these granular energy use profiles allow us to do is to map Filecoin storage provision to renewable energy. So we take data from a few different sources to do this. So one is work by an independent developer known as Jim Pick, looking at the IPs of storage providers and using them to assign locations to each of those storage providers. If you're interested in more of the details on that, you can go to provider.quest, which has all of this open source code on there. And you can also look at one of our earlier meetups. I think it's the meetup from either February or March, which the recording should still be up on YouTube. And you can look at the you can listen to him discuss how he went from IP addresses to locations and also used that distribution, that geographical distribution, to make a best guess as to where miner IDs were that didn't have their IP. So that's where we get the location. Then secondly, we take information from this open source energy model that I've been discussing. You can go on GitHub and you can look at the write-up of that model, or you can go to filecoin.energy and look at the actual dashboard that allows you to investigate the output of that model for a given storage provider. And then we can say, okay, the Filecoin network at this location over this time period is using X amount of energy. What we can then do is take that energy and purchase renewable energy, or allow storage providers to purchase renewable energy that matches that energy consumption profile. And the result of that, as you see, is marked 3 over to the right here. The result of that is we can allow anyone investigating the energy use of a miner ID to look at not just what that energy is, not just where that energy is, but specifically which renewable energy installation is producing energy in order to store those files. And so that gives the tools that we're building for the Filecoin network this huge degree of granularity to not just look at impacts and not just look at, say, carbon emissions, but to get down into the details of exactly how is the Filecoin network interacting with local power grids. And then if you're storing on Filecoin, you can then choose ultimately to store with storage providers who are more sustainable, right? Who are having a more beneficial effect on the transition to renewable energy in their local environment. So that's the goal, is to build out all of these tools. We have these tools that you see here already built out, and we're working to extend the coverage of renewable energy across the Filecoin network. And you're going to hear in a few minutes, or in about 20 minutes, from Marc, who's discussing the guidance that's going out to storage providers to allow them both to connect to renewable energy and to make even stronger sustainability claims that are publicly verifiable. So this is sort of a schematic of how renewable energy purchases work. When I mentioned that you're able to see which, say, solar or wind installation is producing energy in order to power an individual Filecoin storage provider. The way that this works is they put energy into the power grid. They also issue these energy attribute certificates or renewable energy certificates. And the storage provider is able to get both of those certificates to prove that they're supporting this solar generation, say, and energy from the power grid in order to use 100% renewable energy. We've also made efforts to increase the amount of renewable energy that's produced. So we don't want to just be pulling renewable energy from installations that are already built. We want to help catalyze the renewable energy transition. One of the ways in which we've done that as Protocol Labs is investing in new solar in order to produce additional solar capacity that we think is about 3.5 times as much electricity in the US as Filecoin currently consumes. So we're really working to see what are all of the different ways that Protocol Labs and Filecoin and storage providers and the Filecoin Foundation can work to catalyze the renewable energy transition, and how can we be most effective in leveraging the network to do that. Then this is, I think, where the greatest impact of Filecoin Green and of sustainable crypto is going to be in catalyzing that renewable energy transition in the long run. Crypto should do everything that we can as an industry to reduce our environmental impact. We should figure out what our emissions are. We should act to lower those emissions. Where we can't lower those emissions, we should buy environmental products that are going to allow us to reduce our net impact. But the power of crypto goes far beyond just connecting nodes to, say, offsets or renewable energy certificates or any of this. What crypto allows us to do is change how markets process information, right? So markets fulfill one of the most important properties of markets or benefits of markets is to fulfill this information processing effect in which a price signal is transmitted along a supply chain. And that contains information, right, about the scarcity or abundance of these different resources. And that's the fundamental justification for why, for how markets allocate resources is that they pass information that's encoded in a price signal. With fiat money, that's the best you can do, right? You can pass along this price signal. Maybe you can you can add additional information to that price signal through something like the annual sustainability reports that the SEC is going to mandate publicly traded US companies pass along the supply chain. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's fiat money, it's just a price, right? And environmental impacts, things like emissions, they're not just a number, right? We shouldn't think of impacts as scalars. We should think of impacts as vectors. And what something like NFTs shows, right? The entire point of a unit of value being non-fungible is that it contains additional information compared to just that fungible scalar value that tells you what the value of that asset is, right? And so what we're doing in Filecoin Green is building the tools to pull sustainability related information through supply chains in order to allow you to figure out, given what all of your impacts are, right? If you're an actor in this value chain and you have all of these inputs to this process that you're doing, your business, allow you to understand what are the impacts, not just as scalar values, not just as emissions, not just as amount of energy consumed, but allow you to understand specifically, if I'm consuming energy, where is that energy being consumed, right? If I'm buying from some supplier, don't just give me some score, some like ESG score of that supplier. Tell me in a machine readable way what the actual impacts are of the business of that supplier, and then allow me as a person or as a smart contract to choose to take actions from the menu of actions I have available to me that are going to reduce my impact, and then allow me to prove to my customers what that impact is and that I did that accounting properly, right? That is where crypto is going to affect environmental accounting in Web3. So we should do everything we can to reduce our impacts. We should do everything we can to understand those impacts. But the reason we're doing this is partially our direct environmental impact. But the larger effect is going to be how we build those general tools in order to pass robust, rich, and verifiable information through supply chains in order to allow every node in that supply chain to choose to reduce their impact and do that automatically, verifiably, and algorithmically. Another thing that we're doing is supporting storage providers to become verifiably sustainable. Marc is going to talk a lot more about this. We just released, and Marc basically drafted this guidance for storage providers who want to do a really good job being sustainable and prove that they're sustainable to their customers. And so we're going to hear a lot more about that in about 15 minutes. Another thing that we're doing is helping storage providers to build solar or build their own renewable energy capacity. We've talked more about that, and this project actually that Decent has been working on is going awesomely. They're about to release a lot more data on how this installation is working. So watch this space for more on that. Another thing that we're doing is building the tools in order to support developers to allow to build dApps and build companies that have this type of sustainability and environmental awareness I was just talking about, and allow them to build those tools that are going to be pulling this environmental data through supply chains. So we're doing that with virtual events. We're doing that with hackathons. Please come to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit in July, where we're going to do a hackathon and also have a bunch of really great talks. Please apply for green developer grants if you're interested in this space or you have something you want to build in this space. You can visit green.filecoin.io for more information and a link to where you can get those grants. Please participate in accelerators that Protocol Labs is helping to host. We're going to ramp up our ability to work with companies and accelerators to support them when they have an environmental mission. And please apply for follow-on funding through Protocol Labs. So I mentioned green.filecoin.io. That's our website that we just launched in March. Check out green.filecoin.io for more information and everything I've talked about. We're about to release more information about the Sustainable Blockchain Summit and Hackathon, which is going to be on July 22nd through 23rd, right after ECC in Paris. So please come to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit to listen, to speak, to participate in the hackathon, to run your own event. We want to talk with you if you're interested in this space and are doing something cool here. And please get involved. Like I said, here's the link to these slides again in the chat. All of these are live links. You can look at information that we're making available on Filecoin Storage Providers and their renewable energy use. You can sign up to get more updates. You can check out the website. And you can learn more about all of the awesome groups that we're working with that are helping with this mission. So the way this is going to work, if anyone has any questions for me about Filecoin Green or about anything that I just talked about, feel free to drop them in the chat right now, or you can unmute and just ask really quickly. After that, David Phelan from dClimate is going to be talking about using Filecoin and IPFS in order to store weather-related data that is being used to underpin smart contract-based crop insurance. And then Marc Johnson after that is gonna be talking about the Sustainable Storage Provider draft guidance that we just released. Any questions for me before David's talk? Sorry, Daniel. David, sorry. All good? All right. Please feel free if questions come up for me to drop them in the chat or to reach out to me. And we're gonna stick around for a while after both of the talks to just sort of have a general discussion if you want to stay around for that. So David from dClimate, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Alan. Let me share my screen and start my video. Here we go. Hope you guys can all see my screen. So my name is David. I am the CTO at dClimate. Here's our beautiful landing page. You guys can take a look at it on your own time. But essentially what dClimate is, just to give anybody here an introduction who is not familiar with it, is a climate data ecosystem in which our initial and primary goal has been to put all geospatial data that exists that's being collected via satellite imagery across various different organizations onto decentralized systems. So primarily that means decentralized storage, by which that means IPFS, and will of course also mean Filecoin. So let me click here. I can share a little bit of our deck. I won't get too deep in the weeds here, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask at the end. But as mentioned, dClimate is creating a climate data ecosystem. In other words, a truth layer for Earth's climate record. There's a bunch of different sources by which this data is collected, is stored, but a lot of it is quite fractured in disparate areas. And it's really hard for researchers to be able to find this in one particular place. They always have to run particular ETLs or different processes by which they can collect this data, but it's always very bespoke. It's littered with tons of pitfalls, and it's just really hard for people to actually get measurable, insightful data out of this. And so this is not only from a research side, but also from a traditional side, right? You have companies that want to be able to have actionable insight based on this data, but they can't because there's no easy place to kind of get it all in one place. And so the way that dClimate came out, actually, let me see, I skipped this slide here. You can see here, the transparent decentralized marketplace is the primary thing that we're starting out with in order to be able to kind of showcase the data that we've been collecting. We were incubated by Arbol. I won't get too much into the details there, but Arbol is a parametric insurance coverage / company that provides agriculture, logistics, construction companies, and many other industries with the ability to hedge their risk based on the operations that they have. And the only way they can do this, especially based on climate parameters, is if there's an easy way by which they can get that data to then act on it, right? And so in the case of Arbol, they can underwrite this risk because there is a decentralized ledger, so to speak, of this climate data. And so IPFS is being leveraged specifically for this because of the content addressable hashing by the immutability guarantees that IPFS provides, in addition to, of course, its redundancy and distribution that it has out of the box without us having to do too much on our own. So in order to bootstrap this ecosystem and really kind of bring about scientists and users onto the platform in the space, is we're launching a marketplace. And so as mentioned here, it's a transparent decentralized marketplace that allows participants to buy and share data and contribute to the open source ecosystem of data-driven climate resilient applications. And what we mean by that is we just want a place where people can just go find climate data that they know has the immutability guarantees that IPFS and Filecoin provides, without having to worry about all the things that are working out in the back end, right? They just want the data, want to be able to use it and execute based on that. And let me skip to the next slide here. So as mentioned, there are large gaps in climate data. There's no easy way to find the data that you need, and particularly in many private data brokers, there's a lot of black boxes. You don't really know what's going on in the background, and data consumers don't know what the quality is. And so via IPFS, what we can do is we can not only post this climate data on there, but we can then run decentralized validation on this climate data, right? Where you can have particular heuristics that you can attribute to this data, whether how sparse the data is, if it violates any certain thresholds, constraints, certain deviations, things of that nature. And then of course, in the future, much more complex analysis. But because, like I mentioned, IPFS provides these immutability guarantees, you can then do all of these extra things on top of it without having to worry about the underlying complexity. Then some other things mentioned here with respect to problems with climate data is that there are few technical standards, or there's many of them, which are somewhat competing, and it's hard to understand exactly what you need and then for what purpose. And then there's also really a lack of a true marketplace. As I mentioned, there are a lot of private data brokers, but there's no easily accessible way to sort of index this data, especially some of these data sets do require extra work to be put in. So you definitely may want to compensate the people who come up with this data, right? And kind of put this together, whether it's derivative data sets, imputed data sets. So you want to be able to incentivize or bootstrap a marketplace. And so that's what dClimate has been building, and it's basically built soon TM. We will be releasing it, and we're super excited to do so. But we want to be able to allow data publishers to monetize this data and go beyond the opaque industry that everybody is pretty much accustomed to. And here you can just read some stats. I can share some of these slides after the fact, so I won't read them too much. But it's definitely, I would say here in particular, there's a huge cost associated to the accidents and damages and injuries that that results from climate disasters. And as Alan mentioned, measurement is very important, in particular in the case of municipalities and governments being able to make the decisions that are required in order to mitigate climate change and the disasters that are associated to it. If you don't have the data, then it's hard to make a decision, right? So that's where dClimate is really focusing itself, is to essentially be that Schelling point from a measurement perspective, so that governments and municipalities, organizations can all be able to at least agree on fundamental facts, which is the data, and then from then on out, be able to make or perform the actions required in order to mitigate the things that are causing those particular pieces of data to result. So here you can see there are a variety of different sectors / industries that are affected by climate data that are also can either be users of the climate data / providers of it. And so it's everything from, like I mentioned, logistics, financial investors needing ESG, as was mentioned by Alan as well, agriculture, energy producers, banks, Fortune 500 companies, and then something in particular that we're really interested in, and something that we're focusing on particularly, is the issues of carbon and carbon offsets, and how this is adequately measured, especially measured at scale. And so this is something that we're focusing a lot of our efforts on, and IPFS will also be a core component here. Then just to quickly switch here to the providers aspect, there are a lot of companies or individuals who are providing this data, but there's no easy way for them to sort of monetize this, or like, where do they put it? And so there's everything from IoT sensor companies, whether it's hobbyists or actual companies themselves, satellite imagery providers. And so we kind of want to create this one-stop shop for all of this together. And so, as mentioned, we want to, we're creating a marketplace for this, creating this immutable record for climate data releases where everything is tagged. And of course, as mentioned, IPFS makes this very easy. Distribution mechanism, which we're using on chain. And so you can purchase these data assets and have a record of what you purchased for what you need to use. And then beyond that, there's forecasting, which we are looking to also add to our marketplace relatively soon. So not only do you have the data that you want to use, but then you could plug those in, hopefully soon, in a no-code fashion, where that data can now pipe into decentralized models, which can then output a particular piece of data that you particularly care about. And here is a little preview of our marketplace. You can see here, it's quite easy to filter through the things that you care about, the information that's needed. For anybody who's familiar with this, this is pretty much adding some additional metadata to what is traditionally found on Stack. So this is a way that is both human readable, but then also machine readable for anybody who is interested in just browsing for data sets they care about, or if they want to post their own. And let's see. So I'll skip through the rest of these slides. There's oh yeah, so here I'll mention that we have some products that are already using what we have on IPFS. So there's weather risk calculator, especially for construction sites, built by the dClimate team itself. And there's a real-time weather dashboard. I mentioned that we have our data on IPFS, and we have about, I think at this point, close to 40 terabytes of climate data. And so if anyone here on this call is interested and wants to play around with these data sets that are already there, you can go on our API, api.dclimate.net. All this is a middleware layer. It's Django or Flask app that basically makes the queries to IPFS data that we have easier, but you can also read directly from IPFS. We have a library that you can also use. And so this is something, oh, thank you so much, Alan. I just saw you posted that in there. I was going to do the same. Yeah, and what you can do here is just register for a token. This is just so we can keep track of usage, but otherwise it's totally permissionless. And again, you can read it from IPFS yourself if you wish, but this API kind of just creates this wrapper, which makes it easier to make these requests. And you can find tons of different pieces of climate data. If there's something here or something that isn't here that you're interested in using or finding, or that would be really useful for yourself as an individual or as a company, please reach out to us. Please reach out to me. We have community@dclimate.net, David@dclimate.net, and we can see what we can do to onboard the data sets that you need. And so this is what a lot of our products are being built on, especially that of Arbol. parametric coverage company, as mentioned, that will allow them to be able to expand and underwrite more risk for larger areas, especially the more data that you have allows them to then make more decisions and better decisions, right? And yeah, so that's pretty much the dClimate side, at least from the data marketplace and what we're building. As mentioned, we're doing some things with carbon as well. We want to be able to accurately measure this information, large swaths of land. And the only way that it's possible is by scaling with IPFS and the ability to store this via permanence within Filecoin. Let's see. So yeah, there's just a few more things within these slides that, again, I could share after the fact, but something that okay, yeah, let's go to this last slide, the infrastructure slide. So we are leveraging Chainlink in order for the verifiability of scripts, and so that decentralized providers can run validation scripts or publish data for the data that already exists on IPFS. So this is kind of a rough guide as to what our infrastructure looks like for anyone who is interested or familiar with Chainlink. This is kind of how it works. We use our smart contracts to index our data. We use the graph, of course, to then actually parse and actually index the data. But this is a one-stop shop, so to speak, where people can find the data sets. But it's an orchestra, so to speak, of a bunch of different decentralized infrastructure technologies, whether it's IPFS and Chainlink. And it's not mentioned here, but Filecoin as well for data permanence. Right now, what we're just doing is finalizing some of our data structures and ensuring that we have everything in line for what we want to be able to then post it up on Filecoin/estuary, which will facilitate that for us. And I know we're a little bit close to out of time, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up here as to some of the different pieces of data infrastructure that we're working on the IPFS side to make things easier. Having spoken with the Protocol Labs team, who are all amazing, we're pretty much advised to be as close to the data layer as possible. And I'm a bigger fan of that too. Middleware usually has a way of failing. So what we were focusing on are what are ways that we can encode data into IPFS using IPLD, for anyone who's familiar, so that people can query for this data directly from the data layer itself and without needing any middleware layers to parse it, because there's places for failure for the data to get corrupted in some sort of way. So you want to be able to just query the data directly. And so to recap, we initially started with a linkless data structure, which provides immutability guarantees via this chain or this blockchain data structure, so to speak, which is important because, as any of you are familiar with the climate data sector, there are new data sets that are either being posted or being revised. And so you want to be able to create this chain so you can reduce over it. However, some of the drawbacks here is that you need to roll up the entire history in order to kind of get the latest values, which definitely increases the load that needs to be served up, in addition to latency, load time, so on and so forth. So we decided to kind of do a re-architecture here that was more generalizable, regardless of the type of data that it is. And so we have a Merkle DAG, and I could definitely get into this at some other point, but this is what our newer, I would say, data structures have looked like, which provide us the ability to store data sets bucketed by various different days, beyond just normal data. Let's see, I love how dClimate's model combines self-sovereignty of data providers. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Alan. And that's what we're striving for. So yeah, this is the Merkle DAG data structure, which again provides the ability for people to search directly and query directly within IPFS for the data sets that they care about, and specifically the days and the times that they care for, and definitely, of course, the locations as well within that. Aside from that, we've also been exploring a few other alternatives, and I would say these are more experimental. This is more of like a light client approach for anyone who's familiar with that term, that we can pre-process a lot of the data sets that we already have, the traditional like NetCDFs, GeoTIFFs, and so on and so forth, into something known as a K-squared time series raster, which will give us the ability to improve querying speed from 10 to 10,000 times. And this would be particularly interesting for querying these data sets for visualization purposes and for time series analysis, and for something that you kind of need very quick query times, but the immutability guarantees aren't as important. This is where we're exploring this to kind of ensure that our users and anyone who's interested in leveraging this data can do so in a very efficient way without needing to worry about like latency or load times. So these are some of the things that we're exploring. And aside from that, I don't even have it included here, but there are other data types. Cloud optimized geotips. Astral has done amazing work regarding this. And so we've been exploring different aspects here, quad trees, which are k-squared times series raster. It goes along with a lot of technical details. I won't go too deep and bore you guys with it, but these are just a few of the areas that we're exploring. Of course, we're always onboarding our data sets with our traditional implementations, but we're really open to everything that the wider scientific and GIS space is using, including there's the ZAR files and many others. What Pangeo is working on with open source ETLs, its own other beast, but I hope I gave enough of a recap here that provides you guys enough information if you're curious to check out our API. And yeah, just check out our marketplace, soon TM.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, David. That's really cool. I think one of the use cases that you mentioned here is companies that want to monitor and like reduce their impacts, working with data providers through dClimate to understand what their emissions are and potentially like connect them to offsets. How does that like what is that something that people are doing now with dClimate, or like what sorts of data providers are sort of going to be providing that type? Like how is that sort of going to work?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Alan. So yeah, it's a good point too. Companies want to be able to measure their environmental impact. We're actually onboarding very relatively soon some models in which people can measure. I'm trying to see if we have any slides about this here, but what we'll be able to do is measure the carbon impact in particular areas, especially whether it's like factories or industries, since all this stuff is very important for not only an organization itself to self-monitor, but external parties to be able to audit what is being self-reported, right? And so right now, like I mentioned, I think we're going to be onboarding 2 data sets. So we're just fine-tuning the models at the moment, where people will be able to just kind of make a call via the API that of course is underneath IPFS, and you can sort of see more or less. This will require calibration for sure, but the general environmental impact of a particular area, especially when it comes to carbon.
Awesome, really cool, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, or you could unmute and ask something. I think we have one hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's very, very interesting project. As far as I understand, there is a bunch of companies and institutions that provide data and others use them to process and to get some insights. But what I was thinking about, maybe it's possible, maybe you already were mentioning it, but I missed. Data, raw data is, and if we're talking about big data, it's quite huge amount of information, right? Like processing this data and receiving some intermediate results also pretty much valuable. And maybe there are place for some roles, different roles who can process data and give some intermediate results and also store them in the ecosystem to be used by other companies furthermore, and save some time for process.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's a really good point. I didn't dive too deep in the weeds, but you're 100% correct. There's definitely these intermediary data sets, which are definitely important, that are either used as inputs to other models or for other data sets, right? So that like reanalysis can be performed. And so we definitely encourage, and we will be having incentives and things of that nature to help other companies onboard their intermediate sets and provide an ecosystem by which these sets can still be validated as well, depending on the heuristics that the DAO, the community, decides. And so we want to have the community be involved in all decision making that happens here, whether it's the onboarding of new sets, incentivizing the onboarding of new data sets, or if it's validating sets that are already there. But nevertheless, regardless of what's being posted there, we definitely do want any organization to upload what they can, and if it helps facilitate anything that somebody else is doing. So we want to create this dual-sided marketplace where anybody can use this data.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David. It was great to hear about what you're doing at dClimate. We're gonna, at least I am. I'm not sure what your schedule is, but if you have time to stick around after Marc's presentation, we're gonna, stop the live stream and just sort of have a general discussion if people want to ask more questions there. Marc, you're up next.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alan, for that awesome intro presentation. And David, great presentation there on dClimate. I am always very impressed with the products and services that you guys are developing. Well, while I share my screen, if someone could give me a thumbs up that they can see the screen. Looks like so. Okay, great. Well, like I mentioned, my name is Marc Johnson. I'm an environmental solutions architect here on the Filecoin Green team. I'm fairly new to the team, about 2 months into the role here, but for the past several years, I've been working at this intersection of crypto and climate, looking at how we could leverage the Web3 tech stack to drive more environmental action on a global basis. I spent a few years working in the shipping sector, specifically building a blockchain-based platform to track the environmental quality parameters of the fuel used by cargo ships and cruise liners. And most recently was at an environmental policy think tank called RMI, or the Rocky Mountain Institute, where I was building a blockchain-based platform for tracking the embodied emissions in industrial sectors, so steel, lithium, aluminum, cobalt. And also while at RMI, I was co-leading the Crypto Climate Accord, which some of you all may be familiar with and Alan referenced earlier, where myself and our team developed the CCA's carbon accounting guidance documentation to showcase how crypto sector stakeholders should think about decarbonizing their operations, depending on where they resided in that value chain. Very excited to be here today. As Alan mentioned earlier, or I'll start off by just doing a few quick slides that Alan already talked through, talking about the ambitions of Filecoin Green. It's our aim to make environmental accounting a Web3 superpower. And the primary way in which we are doing that is by building the Web3 native monitoring and reporting tools for for publicly verifiable sustainability claims. And just ever so quickly, I'm actually going to drop my video just so that bandwidth stays good. So as Alan mentioned earlier, the primary way in which we are doing that is through this 4-step process, right? Filecoin is unique in that we have these on-chain proofs of all the resources that storage providers are committing to the network. Therefore, we have a very robust energy consumption model that we can use to evaluate the energy use of the Filecoin network in total, as well as individual storage providers. And with that information and utilizing that model, we're now connecting the energy consumption profile of the network to renewable energy sources. And the primary instrument that we're utilizing to connect to renewable energy is through RECs, renewable energy certificates. And then 3, of course, as I'm here to talk about today, is how we are supporting Filecoin storage providers in decarbonizing their operations. And this guidance documentation that Alan referenced earlier, and that I'll go over with you here, is really focused on identifying and defining some of the best practices in order to suggest how storage providers should move towards a more sustainable and decarbonized future. And before we really get into the details, I just want to bring it back to this one slide that Alan showcased earlier, just to highlight the importance and the rigor that we're applying here in our approach. The default approach to decarbonizing operations is to quantify your environmental footprint via a carbon accounting exercise, then seek ways in which you can mitigate or minimize those emissions, and then look to offsets to cover whatever extra amount of environmental impact you have that you weren't able to mitigate and minimize. That is a very clear three-step approach that corporations or individuals should take. However, more times than not, corporations tend to do a fairly hand-wavy carbon accounting exercise and then skip the middle step and seek those low-cost offsets. And from an environmental impact and from a measurable impact perspective, that leaves a lot left to be desired. And that's why we are so confident that by applying the approach that we've mapped out here, by conducting a very comprehensive carbon accounting exercise, then matching those in a very transparent and verifiable manner to renewable energy resources and helping storage providers or network participants decarbonize their operations, we'll be able to make a much more measurable impact on the environmental impact of our network. And it's really our long-term aim to, one, validate this approach within the Filecoin ecosystem, decarbonizing Filecoin in record time, and building infrastructure along the way that can be leveraged by other networks within the Web3 ecosystem to decarbonize their operations, and then in a long-term perspective, allow legacy industries to leverage this infrastructure, these tools that we're developing, so that they can decarbonize their global supply chains, whether it's the steel sector, whether it's the lithium sector, whether it's concrete, you name it. Those hard to abate physical commodities are an area where I believe, by building these solutions here and now in the Filecoin ecosystem, down the road, we'll be able to apply them to those sectors that have a much larger global footprint. Now, to get into the ways in which we're supporting storage providers, as I mentioned earlier, and as Alan has mentioned a few times, we have been hard at work drafting this V1 guidance for sustainable storage providers. And this is really built off of a number of existing documents and guidance documentations. We've been able to draw inspiration, one from the Crypto Climate Accords, carbon accounting best practices, as well as the greenhouse gas protocol, as well as CDP's RE100 procurement guidance. A number of different resources were utilized to come up with what we believe is a very practical and actionable set of best practices that storage providers can pick up and utilize to decarbonize their operations. And it really covers all three of those primary sectors that we talked about earlier. It's very comprehensive in the ways in which we should evaluate our environmental footprint by conducting a very comprehensive carbon accounting practice. Then it talks about the various ways in which they should procure renewable energy and seek to decarbonize their operations, and to showcase how they are actually decarbonizing along the way. So I'll go over a few of those primary items here, but also want to invite anybody to stand up and ask a question along the way in case you would like more info or more details on the things. And I also may ask somebody in the crowd, maybe Alan, I can't see the chat, can't see any hands. So if anybody does stand up, please help me out here. So first and foremost, one of the primary things that we've scoped out in this guidance documentation is a Filecoin Green pledge. This is the first big proposed initiative that we've built into this guidance documentation, and it really seeks to encourage the collective decarbonization efforts across the Filecoin network from individual storage providers. And so we have created this, series of commitments that storage providers can use to showcase their commitment to sustainability across their global operations. And if storage providers adhere to the Filecoin Green pledge, then it means that they're committed to 80% renewable energy procurement by end of fiscal year 2023. That's very, very soon. And then 100% by the end of fiscal year 2025. And we're very confident that if all storage providers adhere to this, then the network will be 100% carbon neutral more than likely very carbon negative by end of fiscal year 2025, which would be quite a quick and strong decarbonization effort across such a large network. And the way in which storage providers can adhere to that claim is through a very, 3 different tiers of sustainability claims that we've also mapped out in this guidance documentation, all of which have different reporting requirements as well as perceived benefits. We are building in these incentive structures so that if storage providers do adhere to one of these tiered sustainability claims, they will receive some sort of benefits, whether it's larger, higher reputation score in FilRep, the Filecoin reputation system, or some other type of benefit. But as you can see here, all of these are very, very rigorous tiers of sustainability claim that require SPs to report on a number of crucial operational metrics, such as approximate location, water usage, energy consumption data, and spells out the various ways in which they need to calculate their emissions profile and to match their energy consumption profile to market instruments. Here I called on EACs, energy attribution credits, but as I mentioned earlier, more times than not, they're referenced as renewable energy credits, RECs. And as you can see, all 3 of these kind of build off of each other. So the bronze tier, the minimum tier, spells out a number of very, very comprehensive metrics that storage providers need to report on. And then the silver tier, leverages all of those requirements and does so in a more comprehensive manner, builds on top of it, asking storage providers to match their energy consumption on a quarterly basis rather than on an annual basis, and to account for the embodied emissions of their hardware configurations, which early indications lead us to believe that that is a fairly sizable chunk of the emissions profile of any storage provider. And then lastly, even the gold tier takes it a step further, applying a different type of carbon accounting approach that is much more rigorous, much more detailed, and asks storage providers to, procure or generate renewable energy in various ways, either via on-site generation or granular credits that are obtained through PPAs, power purchase agreements, or other means. Going next, a primary component of this guidance documentation, as I said earlier, we want to make this as actionable and practical as possible for storage providers. We don't want this to be very burdensome for them to have to adhere to and something that disrupts their normal operations. Running a storage provider operation is no small feat, so we want to help them and nudge them towards more decarbonized future, but don't want to do anything that is very difficult. So we are in the early stages developing a reporting portal, which will be a utility upload based on an IPLD database called Pando, which will build into the Filecoin reputation system. That specifies a number of relevant operational metrics that storage providers can report on a monthly or even a quarterly basis. And what is really key to this, and what this diagram tries to showcase, but it fails to showcase, is that on the front end, as storage providers are uploading these crucial operational metrics, on the back end, we'll be working with third-party auditors to assess the validity of these relevant operational metrics to ensure that storage providers are actually adhering to the requirements of the sustainability claims and of the Filecoin Green Pledge to actually decarbonize, to make measurable impact on decarbonizing their operations throughout time. So here's just a few of the items I've listed, a few of the metrics and the ways in which they need to report these operational parameters. And this, I can tell you, is not a full list. I think it'll be an ever-evolving list that we work on with SPs and with the auditors to ensure that they are adhering to the most rigorous carbon accounting and operational metrics possible. Lastly, I want to touch on the carbon accounting methods. As I mentioned earlier, the 3-stage approach towards decarbonizing operations is to conduct a very rigorous carbon accounting practice, then look to mitigate and minimize those emissions in every way possible, And only once you've done those 2 steps should you look for offsets to cover, the last tiny little remaining sliver of your environmental footprint or of your profile. And so with that in mind, it really comes back to the rigor of your carbon accounting methodology or of your practice. And in this guidance documentation, once again, drawing inspiration from the Crypto Climate Accords guidance documentation, which that illustration on the right is from. We have specified the 3 primary carbon accounting methods that SP should look to map to or adhere to, and showcase the hierarchy of these methods. First being the consequential approach of carbon accounting, which really rests on or resides on looking at the actual or the marginal impact of the storage provider's operations, by understanding what the actual impact that the electricity consumption has on the local grid. And this consequential approach generally utilizes marginal emissions rates versus the next 2, market-based and location-based, which generally utilize just annualized, generalized emissions factors, which are representative of an entire region or more times than not, just an entire country. And now, I don't mean to write those emissions factors off. They are very good for various approaches, such as this market-based and this location-based attributional method of carbon accounting. But in a consequential approach, if and where you can use marginal emissions factors, you have much greater insights on what the impact of your operations are on the local grid dynamics. And from an environmental impact perspective, we believe that is a more comprehensive way to account for those the environmental impacts of your operations. So as you can see here, this is just one of the primary ways in which we're developing very detailed guidance on how storage providers can seek to mitigate and minimize the environmental impact of their operations to move towards a decarbonized future. And along the way, if they're able to report on these crucial operational metrics and showcase in a transparent and verifiable manner how they're decarbonizing their operations, then we would like to allow them to benefit from moving towards a more sustainable future. I know that was maybe a lot, especially from the carbon accounting stuff. So I will just briefly wrap up here and say what Alan said earlier. We're the 4th prong of our approach is to build this environmental Web3 developer community. We're doing so through hackathons and through grants and through a number of different ways in which we're really looking to catalyze the market of crypto X climate projects. And we held our first Sustainable Blockchain Summit back in March at South by Southwest. We're hosting another one in July in Paris, right off the backs of ECC. And we would love to have you all there, either in person or join virtually. And please do visit us at Filecoin Green for more information or reach out to any of us if you have any questions. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. I see the chat has some. Or invite
the chat's
anybody.
A lot of me giving people more information.
Wonderful, wonderful. And also, I just so quickly, I can, after I stop sharing, I can show or send along the link to the GitHub issue where there is a link to the draft guidance documents, where if anybody is interested, please dive into that and provide as much feedback, questions, or comments that you may have. We did end our formal public comment period about 10 days ago, but by all means, if anybody, perfect. Thanks, Alan, for that. If anybody does have any questions or wants to talk about anything that we have in mind, please do feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah. Anyone have questions on anything Marc just covered? I also want to emphasize that we see our role in all of this as building tools that are going to support storage providers in making really strong sustainability claims. We're clearly Filecoin is a decentralized permissionless network. Our role is to build the infrastructure so that when people want to do a really good job being sustainable, they're able to plug in and do this and get the support they need. And if you want to be involved in any part of that, we want to work with you. So any questions on the sustainability guidance? Mark, just whenever.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for the time, Alan. Thank you for double clicking on that last point. I think that was a very crucial point. And once again, just throwing it out there. If anybody has any questions, would like to talk further, please do feel free to reach out.
Awesome. So that's the live stream portion.